Robert Hensley had everything money could buy. At 48, he wore tailored suits that cost more than most people earned in a month. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He lived in a penthouse overlooking the city, drove cars that turned heads, and commanded respect in every boardroom he entered. But none of it mattered. Because his twin sons, Christopher and Nicholas, couldn't walk. The boys were 7 years old, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, with faces that still held the softness of childhood. They'd been born healthy and strong, running through the house, climbing trees, chasing their golden retriever through the backyard. Then came the accident 2 years ago. A car had jumped the curb, while the boys were playing in front of their grandmother's house. In an instant, everything changed. Since that day, the twins had been confined to leg braces and crutches. Robert had taken them to every specialist on the East Coast. He'd flown them to clinics in Switzerland, consulted with surgeons in Japan, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars searching for answers. The doctors all said the same thing. The damage to their legs was severe. Surgery might help, but it might also make things worse. Physical therapy was slow. Progress was minimal. Robert was a man who solved problems. He built companies, closed deals, made impossible things happen. But he couldn't fix his sons. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when Robert first saw the boy. The city streets were busy, as they always were during lunch hour. Robert was walking back to his office after a meeting. Christopher and Nicholas moving slowly beside him on their crutches. The boys had insisted on coming with him that day. They liked to feel normal, to be part of their father's world, even though every step was difficult. That's when Robert noticed him. A young boy, maybe 12 years old, sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk near the corner. He wore clothes that had seen better days, torn and faded, several sizes too large. His skin was dark, his hair cut short, and his feet were bare despite the cooling autumn air. In front of him sat a small cardboard sign with words written in careful letters. "Hungry!" Anything helps. God bless. Most people walked past without looking. Some dropped coins into the paper cup beside him. The boy nodded his thanks each time, soft and sincere. Robert slowed his pace. He'd seen street children before. The city was full of them. He usually gave to charities, wrote checks to homeless shelters, did his part in the abstract way that wealthy people often do. But something about this boy caught his attention. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, with a kind of patience that seemed too old for his years. Or maybe it was the way he looked at Christopher and Nicholas, not with pity but with something gentler, understanding perhaps. The twins had stopped walking. They stood there, leaning on their crutches, staring at the boy. "Dad," Christopher said quietly, "can we give him something?" Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a $20 bill and handed it to Nicholas. The boy carefully made his way forward, balancing on his crutches, and dropped the bill into the cup. The street boy's eyes widened. He looked up at Nicholas, then at Christopher, then at Robert. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "Thank you so much." He started to stand, and Robert noticed something. The boy moved with unusual grace, despite his ragged appearance. But more than that, as he stood, he reached out and placed his hand on Nicholas's shoulder. Just a simple touch, brief and light. "God bless you," the boy said. Nicholas smiled. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied. "I'm Nicholas. That's Christopher, and that's our dad." Marcus nodded to each of them. His eyes settled on the crutches, on the braces visible beneath the boy's school pants. There was something in his expression that Robert couldn't quite read. Not pity, something else. "You'll be okay," Marcus said softly to Nicholas. "I can feel it." It was an odd thing to say, and Robert felt a strange prickle at the back of his neck. But before he could respond, a businessman pushed past them, muttering about people blocking the sidewalk. The moment broke. "Come on, boys," Robert said. "We need to get back." As they walked away, Robert glanced back once. Marcus had sat down again, but he was watching them go. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Robert felt that strange sensation again. Like something had shifted, though he couldn't say what. That night, at dinner, Nicholas complained about his legs less than usual. Robert noticed, but didn't comment. The boys often had good days and bad days. He'd learned not to read too much into temporary improvements. But the next morning, Nicholas walked down the stairs with less difficulty than Robert had seen in months. "Dad," Nicholas said at breakfast, "my legs feel better." Christopher looked at his brother with a mixture of hope and envy. "Really?" "Yeah, they don't hurt as much." Robert felt his chest tighten. He wanted to believe it meant something, but he'd been disappointed too many times before. "That's good, son. Keep doing your exercises." Over the next few days, Nicholas continued to improve, not dramatically but noticeably. He put more weight on his legs. He moved a little faster. The change was subtle but undeniable, and Robert couldn't stop thinking about the boy on the street corner. It was ridiculous, of course, a random encounter with a homeless child. Couldn't have anything to do with his son's improvement. It was coincidence. Or perhaps the physical therapy was finally showing results. But there was that touch, that brief moment when Marcus had placed his hand on Nicholas's shoulder. Robert told himself he was being foolish. He was a man of logic, of science, of measurable results. He didn't believe in miracles or healing touches or any of that nonsense. Still, the following Tuesday, he found himself walking past that same corner with both boys. Marcus was there in the same spot, with the same sign. This time, Robert approached directly. He pulled out his wallet again, but Marcus held up his hand. "You gave already, sir. More than enough." "Take it," Robert said, holding out another 20. Marcus hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." The twins stood beside their father. Nicholas was using his crutches less today, putting more weight on his own legs. "You're doing better," Marcus observed, looking at Nicholas. "I am," Nicholas said, his face bright. "A lot better." Marcus smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and more hopeful. "I'm glad." "Can you—" Christopher spoke up suddenly. "Can you touch me too?" "Like you touched Nicholas?" Robert opened his mouth to stop him, embarrassed by the request. But Marcus didn't seem surprised. He stood and walked over to Christopher, moving with that same easy grace. He placed both hands on Christopher's shoulders, gentle and warm. "You're strong," Marcus said softly. "Stronger than you know." Christopher looked up at him with wide eyes. They stood like that for a long moment. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and Robert felt that prickle again at the back of his neck. The street noise seemed to fade. Time felt suspended. Then Marcus stepped back. "God bless you," he said. Robert heard himself speak before he'd fully formed the thought. "Where do you live, Marcus?" The boy shrugged. "Different places. Shelters when they have room. Other places when they don't." "How old are you?" 12, almost 13. "Where are your parents?" Marcus looked down. "My mom passed 3 years ago. Never knew my dad." Robert felt something crack open in his chest. Here was this child, alone in the world, with nothing. And yet there was something about him, a dignity, a kindness, a strange sense of peace that Robert had rarely encountered in anyone, much less a homeless boy. An idea formed. It was crazy, impulsive, not at all like him. But then Robert thought about Nicholas's improvement. He thought about the way Marcus had touched Christopher with such gentleness. He thought about his sons, who had been through so much, and this boy, who had been through perhaps more. "Marcus," Robert heard himself say, "I'm going to make you an offer. And I'm half serious, though it sounds like a joke." Marcus looked up at him. "If you can heal my children, if you can help them walk again without crutches, I'll adopt you. I'll give you a home, a family, everything you need." Robert had meant it to sound lighter than it came out. He'd meant the laugh that followed to soften it. But even as he spoke, he realized part of him was deadly serious. Marcus studied him for a long moment. There was an old soul in those young eyes. "I can't promise anything like that, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I'm not a healer. I just care about people. And sometimes, when I touch someone and really care, they feel better. But I don't control it. It's not something I do. It's something that happens." The honesty in his voice was striking. "But," Marcus continued, looking at Christopher and Nicholas, "I would be happy to spend time with your sons, to be their friend. Not for adoption or money or anything like that, just because they seem like good people. Like you do, sir." Robert felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "Would you like to come have dinner with us?" he asked. "Tonight?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Really? Really?" That evening, Marcus sat at Robert's dinner table, cleaned up and wearing some of Christopher's clothes that were still too big for him. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had fussed over him, making sure he ate enough. Her eyes bright with tears she tried to hide. The boys talked and laughed with Marcus like they'd known him for years. Marcus told stories about the city, about the people he'd met, about small kindnesses he'd witnessed. He had a way of finding beauty in difficult places, of seeing the good in people. Robert watched and listened and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or something deeper than that. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a regular visitor. Robert had offered to put him in a hotel, but Marcus had been uncomfortable with that. Instead, Robert paid for a room at a supervised group home for youth, a clean, safe place where Marcus could sleep and have meals. And several times a week, Marcus came to the Hensley home. Christopher's improvement began about a week after that first touch. Like Nicholas, it was gradual. A little less pain, a little more strength, better balance. The doctors were baffled but pleased. They talked about natural healing, about the resilience of young bodies, about the unpredictable nature of recovery. Robert didn't argue with them, but he watched Marcus with his sons, saw the way the boy would casually rest a hand on their shoulders, or help them with their exercises, or simply sit with them while they did their homework. There was never anything dramatic or showy about it. Just presence, just care, and the boys continued to improve. By Thanksgiving, both Christopher and Nicholas were walking with only minimal bracing. By Christmas, they'd abandoned the crutches entirely, though they still tired easily and couldn't run quite like they used to. But they were walking. They were getting stronger every day, and Marcus had become part of the family. Robert had meant his offer half as a joke, a wild promise made in a moment of desperation and hope. But as the months passed, he found himself thinking about it more seriously. Marcus still lived at the group home. He went to school now, performing well despite the years he'd missed. He had dinner with the Hensleys 3 or 4 times a week. He played video games with the twins, helped them with their homework, listened to their stories about school. The house felt warmer when Marcus was there, more complete. One evening in January, after the boys had gone to bed, Robert and Marcus sat in the living room. The fireplace crackled softly. Outside, snow was falling, blanketing the city in white. "Marcus," Robert said, "do you remember what I said when we first met? About adoption?" Marcus looked at him with those old, wise eyes. "Yes, sir. I meant it," Robert said. "Not as a transaction, not as payment for what you've done for my sons, but because I want you to be part of this family, because the boys love you, because Mrs. Chen lights up when you're here, because this house feels right when you're in it." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I know I can't replace your mother," Robert continued. "I wouldn't try, but I can give you a home, a family, a future. If you want it?" Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" Robert thought about it. He thought about all the money he'd spent trying to fix his sons, all the specialists and surgeries and treatments that had barely helped. He thought about this 12-year-old boy, who had nothing but somehow had everything that mattered. "Because," Robert said slowly, "you taught me something. You taught me that healing isn't always about medicine or surgery or money. Sometimes it's about caring, about being present, about touching someone's life with kindness." He paused, his own eyes growing damp. "You gave my sons their lives back, Marcus. Not because you have magic powers, but because you showed them, showed all of us, what it means to truly care about another person. You reminded us that love is the greatest healer." Marcus was crying openly now. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to be part of your family. Very much." Robert crossed the room and pulled the boy into his embrace. Marcus clung to him, and Robert felt the weight of the child's grief and loneliness and hope all at once. "Welcome home, son," Robert whispered. The adoption process took several months, but by Marcus's 13th birthday in April, it was official. Marcus Hensley was the legal son of Robert Hensley, and the brother of Christopher and Nicholas. The boys were walking normally now, though they still had regular physical therapy. The doctors called it a remarkable recovery. Robert called it a miracle, though not the kind he'd been looking for. The miracle wasn't that Marcus had healed his sons' legs through some mystical power. The miracle was that a homeless boy with nothing had taught a wealthy man with everything what truly mattered. That caring for others, opening your heart, making room in your life for someone who needed it. That was where real healing happened. Years later, when people asked Robert about his 3 sons, because he always called them that, all 3 of them, he would tell this story. And he would say that he'd made an offer as a joke, a desperate promise he hadn't really believed in. But Marcus had touched more than his sons' shoulders that day. He'd touched their lives, their hearts, their family. And that, Robert would say, was the greatest healing of all. Because sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a hospital or pharmacy. Sometimes it's found in the simple act of reaching out and touching someone with genuine love. Sometimes healing comes not from what we have, but from who we welcome into our hearts. And sometimes the person we think we're saving turns out to be the one who saves us.